Hi, welcome to this video. When building modern web applications and especially the front ends of these applications, you typically use frameworks like Angular or Vue or framework-like libraries like React for that. And that is fine, they offer a lot of features, but often you find yourself setting up a complex project before you can get started. And then you always create single-page applications in these projects. Now, what if you just want to add React to one page of your multi-page application where you are rendering your views from the server? Let's say in a Laravel PHP application, the blade views, or expressed with EJS or handlebars. What if you got these views, these pages, or let it be a static website where you write the HTML code on your own? What if you got something like that and you want to use React for some feature on one page and you don't want to build an entire single page application? You obviously can still create some workflows for that, but sometimes it would just be nice to get started quickly. And that's exactly what we'll do in this video. I will show you how you can write React code in a couple of seconds without any complex workflow at all. Now for that, let's start, and I got a brand new empty folder here. Now in there, let's create an index.html file. I'm using Visual Studio Code, and there, if I type HTML, I get this emmet support here to create a skeleton for that with a press of the Enter key. So I'll name this React without JSX or a workflow. This is my page. This is what we'll have a look at in this video. And now I want to build something super simple here in the end. I just want to create a list of items and a button which allows us to add an item. And when we click on an item, I want to delete it. Now, this is obviously not the most exciting app, but it shows us how we can build something which is more than just one button with React without JSX. So for that, I'll first of all create some content here, which I will not control through JSX. So here I'll add React without JSX as a title again. Then we can add a paragraph. It's really easy. And I'm just adding this so that we can see that we can really mix features that might be rendered on a server with features that are controlled with React. Because that React feature will follow here after that horizontal line. There I'll add my React app. And for that, let's first of all import React. We obviously still need that library, and we can get it from react.js.org. If we click on Get Started there, on the right, CDN links, we can simply take these two links. These are the development versions. Here are the production versions, which you can use if you want to ship your app to production. I'll go with the development ones for now. And I add them right before our body tag, the closing body tag. There are the two script imports. Now, what am I importing here? I'm importing the React package and React DOM. These are two separate packages. React is basically the core React features. React DOM is a package that allows you to render your React app to the DOM. So this is what I need, and now after that I'll add my own script. I could write it inline in this file, but I'll outsource it into a separate app.js file. You can name that file however you want though. And let's import that by adding a source attribute here to the script. And in that source attribute, I'll point at app.js like this. So this will import it, important after the React imports here so that we can safely access the features from these imports. Now in app.js, what I want to create is, as I said, a list of items and a button that adds items. And then when we click on an item in the list, that should remove it. So what will we need? Well, we'll need one component. React works with components, as you probably know, that wraps that list and the button. And then that list has, let's say, a couple of separate components, one for each list item. Now, I will use next-gen JavaScript code here. You could write this all with ES5 code, but a lot of browsers natively support next-gen JavaScript already, so I will write this to make it a bit easier and focus more on React here than on JavaScript. And then we create a new functional component like this. I create a constant, give it any name you want. I'll name it list item like this. And this will be a functional component, so it will receive props here. And then in there, we normally would return some JSX code, right? So if you know React, you would return something like a h1 tag written in JavaScript. And this is so-called JSX, which is compiled by a workflow to the code which runs in a browser. Now we got no workflow, so we'll not rely on that, and we'll just write the code that runs in the browser. So instead of returning h1 tag or anything like that here, I will create a React element, as it is called. So that essentially is some JavaScript code which allows React to render that element then to the DOM. And for that, I need to use something from the React package, which I'm importing here. We can use the React object. Now, I didn't define it in the app.js file, but this is an object, a variable exposed by the React package here. So I can use React here, and there we have a create element method. And this creates not a native DOM element, but a React element, so some JavaScript object which React DOM can then render to the DOM. So there, we create an element, and this takes 3 arguments. The first one is the tag I want to create. And let's say a list item here should be a li tag. So li for, well, li elements, right? So this is the tag. The second argument is a JavaScript object where we can pass props to that object. So where we can set the attributes for the list item, something like add a CSS class, for example. Though important, this would be a class name here, right? You might remember that in React, you don't use class, but class name, because class is a reserved word. So we can add a class name like list item here. And then we could add some style.css, and say a list item simply has some padding of 10 pixels and a border of 1 pixel, solid and gray, something like that. And now if we import that, let's do that in the header here, adding a link pointing at style.css. Now we're importing the CSS code. There I defined a list item class, and I'm setting this on the list item, which will eventually be created because I'm passing the class name to that object. We'll also use that object to pass our own props down to other components later. Okay, so that's that. And the third argument then is the content in that element, because right now it would be an empty list item, something like this. Now what should be between these opening and closing tags? That is the third argument we pass here. Now, in this case, I just want to output something which I expect to get through my props here. So we will later create that list item component on our own, and we will pass some props. And the props here will be, let's say, or will hold a title, something like that. We'll have to make sure that we pass such a title property later then. So that's my list item. And let me actually write it all uppercase to make it really clear that I will use this as my own component. You could write it lowercase though. Now I need the list too. And for that, I'll create a class now. Now, in older versions of JavaScript, you couldn't use the class keyword. In such cases, you can use a different syntax for creating class components in React, and you can find that information in the official docs. Here, I'll use the next-gen JavaScript code. So I'll create a class, and I'll name it list. Now, this extends something, and that something is react.component. Again, referring to that React object, which we already used before, and there we'll find a component base class. Now with that extended, we can call the render method here, just as we would do it in JSX-based applications too. And in there we return no JSX code still, because we still have no workflow that would handle it. Instead, we again return React create element, and now I want to create an element which is, let's say, a div which holds my list of list items and that button. Now for that, I first of all will create a div, and now you can also understand why in React, when using JSX, you always need a wrapping div, or since React 16, such a fragment, which you might have heard of. Because obviously we can't just pass comma React create element and then some neighbor or something like that. We can only return one thing here, and that only can have one tag, so any other elements have to be nested in there. That is the idea. So now I have my div. We could pass a class there too, or pass nothing. You can also pass null then. And now the children of that div. And that can be an array now. So this is allowed to be an array. So there we may have neighboring elements. And in that array, we again create an element. So react create element. And obviously, it's getting cumbersome already to always repeat that. So one common pattern you see when using no JSX is that you create your own constant, typically named E. You could name it L or whatever you like, which basically saves a reference to create element. So it doesn't execute it. There are no parentheses here. It just saves the address of that function. So now in all the places where we called react create element, we can call E, which is obviously a bit shorter. So now we still create React elements there, just using that trick or that pattern. And in there, I will now create an unordered list. Maybe not pass any arguments. We can later do that. And in that list here, now I want to have my list items. And for that, I need some state first, where I manage that data. We can initialize that state in the constructor here. So let's add a constructor function. There we have to call super first. That is a hard requirement in React. And then I can set up my state by setting this state equal to a JavaScript object where I have my items, let's say, where I start with an apple and maybe also a banana. So I got my items here. Now I want to output them, and I don't want to output these strings. I want to output the list item for each of these items. So here we take this state items, and now we map it into an array of JSX element. If we would use JSX, in this case, just into an array of created elements with react create element. So here I'll get my individual item, and I'm using an arrow function here. You could use a normal JavaScript function there too if you wanted to. And I will return either react create element, or since we have that shortcut, E, and then create a list item, now not wrapped in quotation marks, instead referring to our own constant here, list item, and then there we again pass some props. Now important, we have to pass a prop here. We have to pass that title. So here I now pass the title argument, or the title property I should say, and I bind it to item. Item is the argument we automatically receive in the function we pass to map. Map will go through all the elements in that list and pass the name of each element as item into this function. So item will be apple, and then it will be banana. So we're passing apple and thereafter banana for the first and second element we're creating here. I don't need to pass any third argument because I have no children there. There will be nothing between the opening and closing tag of my own component, so to say. So this should render a list already. And now let's see that before we add any other functionality. We got our two components, list item and list, and these components use some native DOM elements as well as then our own component. Now we just need to render it to the DOM. And now we can create a hook for that. Simply some HTML element like a div, typically use a if div, with some ID, fruit list, whatever you like. And you can have multiple such hooks and render multiple totally different mini applications to them. You render such a application or a set of components into a hook with the help of React DOM. Remember, that is the second package we imported here. It gives us the React DOM object, and there we have a render method. And the render method allows us to render a React element into a certain place in the DOM. For that, we need to create another React element with the E function, or of course with React create element, but we got the E function, so let's use it. And there I pass my list. So this class here, I pass this into this function here. Now, I don't need to specify any props and no third argument here because I don't pass any data. Now we just need to tell React DOM where to render this, and that's the second argument to render. There we use normal JavaScript and then get element by ID to select a JavaScript, a DOM element by its ID. Now remember, I got the fruit list ID. That is the place where I want to render that list. So I'll select this and then pass that as a string to get element by ID. And now let's have a look and let's see if that works. So for that, I'll just double click my index.html file in the Finder. So let me quickly open it there. Here it is. Let's double click it. And as you can see, it opened, but I got an error here. Super keyword unexpected here. I got a typo here. It's the constructor, of course. So make sure to type this correctly. Thereafter, let's reload. And we see our list. Now we get this warning that we have to assign a key to every element. We're not doing this right now, but generally it's working. Now let's quickly fix that by assigning such a key. It's here when we create a couple of elements next to each other. So here where we have an array of React elements. Then we should not just pass the title, but also the key. We can use the text of the item here too as a key. And with that, we fixed one thing, but we also got a list of elements here. We only got one element in there, but React only sees that it's an array. So we should actually also give this unordered list here a JavaScript object where we set the key to fruit list, for example. You can take any key you want, and thereafter, this is gone. So this is working. Let's now add that button and make sure that we can delete items when clicking on them. So let's add the button first. And for that, next to my unordered list here, I'll create another item with the E function. I'll create my button here. And on that button, I want to register a click listener. We do that with this object again. So basically anything which you normally would add directly on the tag, like on click, you now add directly to that JavaScript object here. So you add on click here. And now with that, let's register or create some method which handles that click. So button click handler. And this method should essentially remove the item on which we, should add a new item. So here, let's maybe name this add item handler. So here I want to add a new item. So what I'll do is I'll call set state, just as you do it in a normal React app, but I'm not too happy with that because this is a normal React app. This is actually the core of React. This is what it gets compiled to in the end. So now with this, we can set the state, and there I want to take my old list of items and append a new one. So I will access the old state. Therefore, we should use the function form of set state, where we get the old state as an argument passed in by React. And this is required because set state updates asynchronously, basically. We can't rely on the old set state call already being completed when we do it the next time. So there we can rely on that being the case, and we get the latest state for sure. And then we have to return an object that reflects the new state. And there my items should be the items of the old state. And I'll concat something. This will yield a new list or new array. And that is how we should manipulate arrays and objects in React. Don't manipulate the original ones. Replace them with new ones instead. And here I'll simply concat apple or apples. Now, of course, important, this will lead to issues if you add more than one, because then you'll have duplicate keys because we use that name as a key. But that's fine for me now. Just want to show how you would connect such a button. So I update my state here. Now we just have to connect the add item handler. We do this here. So we bind on click to this add item handler. Now important, I need to call bind here and bind the this keyword so that this, when we call it in here, still refers to the class and not to the window due to the way this behaves in JavaScript. So with that, let's reload this. Would be a good idea to also give this button a key because it's a neighbor of this unordered list, and then you need to assign a key. So let's do that. And one other thing was missing. We probably want to have some text on that button, right? So let's add a third argument here, and that will be the text on the button. So it's the third argument in the E method. And there I'll just say add fruit. Now if I save this, the warning is gone, we got the button. If I click it, we got apples. If I click it more than once, we get that error I mentioned because we have duplicate keys. Yeah, but let's ignore that for now. Last but not least, let's make sure we can remove an item when we click on it. And for that, let's go back to our list item, which is a functional component. And when we click on such a list item, I want to remove it. By the way, one thing I just noticed, our styling is missing. List item. It has the list item class, so that worked. Our import here to style CSS. I have a typo here. List item. Make sure this is written correctly. Yeah, now we got that style too. But back to that click, which I wanted to add. Let's go back to list item. And there I want to add a click to the list item element. Now, as I said, whatever you would add on the tag is added to the object. So let's add another property here on click. And I will call some function which I expect to get via props. So I expect to get a reference to the function I should call through my props here. So I can access props and then maybe on delete, whatever you want. Now we just need to make sure that we got a on delete property. And for that we go to the place where we create the list item, which is in the render function of our list here. And there, besides passing the title and the key, I will now also pass on delete, because that is the property name we just wrote up there, which we expect to get. So now on delete, that should reference or lead to a function which deletes the item. So let's add another method here, delete item handler. There I expect to get the index of the item I want to delete, or let's maybe say the text. And this allows me to then also set my state as up there, relying on the old state, because then my new items will be my old items where I filter. This also yields a new array by running a function on every item in the old array, and that function checks whether that item it looks at fulfills a certain criteria. So here it'll go through all the items and execute this function, and when we return true, that item is added to the newly returned array. If I return false here, it's not added. So here I will return the result of a comparison. I'll check if my item, which is just text, which is just a name, is equal to text. Excuse me, is not equal to text. Because the item with a certain text, let's say banana, is the item I want to remove. So if the item I'm looking at has the same text as the item I want to remove, then this is the item I want to get rid of. So it should not be part of the new array of items, because the new array still will be the array we render to the screen. So all the items that are not removed. With that, I have my delete item handler. Now down there on delete, accesses delete item handler, does not execute it, just hold a reference to it. And then I also need to bind this, and I need to pass that extra argument, which I can pass as a second argument to bind. And that extra argument is item, because remember, this is the text we're considering. So this is banana, apple, and so on. With this, we're setting on delete on the list item. Now let's save this and reload. And if I click on banana, it's gone. If I click on apple, it's gone. And now I can add more apples here. If I did click on one of them, they're all gone because I'm filtering by name, right? But it still shows that it is working fine, that I can remove items, and that I can add items. And this is React without JSX. Now you might be wondering, why would I use that? Well, for one, this is a super lean approach, and if you use that pattern where you reassign React create element, this is not even that much more complex than writing JSX. It's strange to look at first, but after a while, you really get used to it, and you might even prefer that because it is a nice syntax. It makes it easier to understand some of the specialties of React, like class name instead of class, like why do I need a wrapping element around my JSX elements. So it helps with understanding that, and you might overall like that approach. Even if you're not the biggest fan, or if you prefer JSX, this has the advantage of requiring no build workflow, no build step at all. You can take that code, swap out the two imports here for their production equivalents, and you got a production-ready application. And if you only need to sprinkle some React here and there, control this button with React, control this list with React, then this might be a great alternative, especially on multi-page applications. So, worth a try, and important to know what's happening behind the scenes and that you got that option when working with React.